Yo, what is up, my YouTube subscribers? Hope you guys are all having a wonderful Monday. Hope it wasn't too much of a grind after the weekend. So, lately I've been getting into a lot of these videos regarding Reddit. Said it countless times. I really don't do a lot of social media. I have an obscure Instagram account from the suggestion of the guy who made the intro and outro to my videos. And it's just my first name, Francisco, with like maybe 12 random numbers. I mean, they don't mean anything whatsoever. So, if I am going to start an Instagram account, I really should concentrate on making it more, I guess, appealing. I only did what was necessary to open an account. I don't know really the premise of it other than people posting pictures, and I guess, like, I don't know, like you follow people, something along those lines. I swear I'm not being, not acting arrogant. Like, I really don't know. I've never really used it. The same goes for, I'm a little bit more familiar with Twitter. I've used it about maybe 10 times in my whole life. Once to find an old fling of mine from high school, and that was about it. And Facebook is the only one that I'm familiar with, except for like tagging people or, you know, some of the other features. Like I know I have tons of pictures and photos of my daughter. Um, but like if I try to erase the memory that somebody tagged me in, I know it just says hide, so it won't let me get rid of it. So I guess I don't know. It's because somebody else posted it. You guys could tell me. But Reddit is one I only tried once, and I have it recorded. And I keep on asking. Nobody really leaves any comments on if I should or if I shouldn't. But I have mentioned several times that my former best friend had an extremely awful demonic entity in his house that many of us, and when I say many of us, think about The Exorcist, two priests, myself, my mom, my best friend at the time, and what we experienced was traumatic beyond belief. Really scared the shit out of our family because, we're a religious family, we're all Christian. My dad's side of the family, they're Catholic, but the priests we called, they were not Catholic, they were non-denominational, which we are non-denominational. We don't, we're not Baptists. We're not the, type to go grab snakes and, say it's not going to bite me and kill me. We're not fanatical or speaking in tongues, which, to each their own. But I had wrote the story about what had happened that night on Reddit, and I guess the moderator said something along the lines of, "Oh, you're just going like right straight to posting it." So I guess they were insinuating I'm trying to create a new Reddit thing account or whatever, and I'm supposed to post it under like a subreddit for what had occurred. That was my takeaway from it. Um, so wanting to learn a little bit more about it, because a lot of people say, Reddit and 4chan are like the grime, or nearly like the black web of the internet. Not being part of the black web, but just being disgusting to where people could just pretty much post anything they want. Uh, Now I know there's a certain barrier and a certain limit that people won't cross, or they have crossed. They don't care, but I guess they're becoming a little bit more active about keeping things slightly less triple X rated and more like double X rated. Um, so just my interest in that, I started listening to some of these stories, and I found a new one here. Um, so it's an hour long. I'll break it up, but I hope you guys find this interesting because I sure should do. Like I said, have very little experience with Reddit. Um, YouTube is really the only public social media forum I use. I know it's not a forum, but platform, I should say. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and give this a listen.
Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about the Reddit user crazysonthrowoff. The world of Reddit is one filled with mystery and intrigue, and a large reason for that is because there is a subreddit for basically anything you can possibly imagine. That's great if you were interested in a ton of stuff like us, but it's also a double-edged sword, as the weirdos that scour the internet also get to look and post about practically anything they want. One of the subreddits that has always attracted a lot of attention is the Confessions subreddit. Now, the title is self-explanatory. If you have a confession that you want to get off your chest, just post it here. This place has simple confessions like, I've never solved the Rubik's Cube before, and there are also deeper confessions about serious issues in an individual's life. However, there is that third boat that floats around, and I like to call it the really, really strange confessions boat, and today I will be sharing one of the posts that I have found. The title of the post reads, I stood by and allowed my wife to almost kill our son. I was happy she did it. And wow, yeah, that's pretty weird to say the least. Now, this is a very long post, and since it needs to be read in its entirety to be solved, what I decided to do was bring in a couple of awesome channels and just read this post in its entirety for you. And after that's done, we will talk about it. So sit back, get nice and comfy in your chair or bed, or wherever you are, grab some popcorn, and let's do this.
Okay, fair warning, this one is long as hell, apologies for that, but this is very hard for me, and I've been carrying it around for a lot of years. On the advice of my therapist, I've written it all out to try and work out my feelings on it. He didn't advise me to submit it to Reddit, of course, but I have struggled with this for a long time, and I need to hear other people's opinions on it. I still really have no idea how I feel about it, even after all these years, but I will submit for judgment by the masses. I know I did wrong on some things, probably a lot of things. I tried to do my best that I could. My son was very troubled. Very troubled. If you've seen the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin, it will really help to understand what I'm talking about. Because I swear to God, when I watched that film, I thought I was watching a documentary on my life. I felt the writer must have had cameras hidden in my damn house. That's how accurate it was. The only difference in that movie, the boy appears normal to his father and only reveals his true nature to his mother. With my son, he didn't have that mask. His insane behavior was the same with everyone. From the day he was born, my son just came out wrong. He was planned. My wife and I tried to get pregnant and were ecstatic when he was born. He was wanted and loved. We showered affection on him and really tried to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he was miserable. He cried for 13 months straight. I'm not
Okay, so I think I've heard this story. Any of you guys who follow Mr. Ballin closely and seen his videos, he did cover this topic. I believe this is where it's going.
exaggerating, 13 months without a break. He cried until he had no voice left and kept crying. You could see his little face scrunched up and no sound coming out. There were times where he would literally be crying in his sleep. I've never seen or heard any other kid able to do that. We brought him to the doctors, specialists, tried changing his diet, held him, rocked him, toys, swaddling, music, mobiles, everything you could think of. Nothing worked. 13 months of grating, grinding, no sleep hell. Once he got over the crying stage, we thought we were out of the woods, but it quickly became clear that for some unknown reason, he was just angry at being alive. I never saw that kid have a genuine joyous smile once in the time I knew him. I saw him grin, a vicious, horrible grin many times, taking a perverse pleasure from causing pain or suffering on breaking a rule. But a smile from real pleasure at something nice? No, never. Not once. He had no interest in anything positive. He was fueled by hate, and everything he did was bent towards that. As soon as he could talk, his mission in life was to destroy things. He would break or try to break anything that came in his range. Smash it, chew it, throw it in the toilet, whatever he could. After a while, he figured out how to get his diaper off and took great pleasure in pooping and pissing anywhere he could. After a while, he figured out how to hide it and started pissing and pooping in places he wouldn't find right away, grinding it into the carpets, making it even more of a problem to clean and make the house stink. When he got older, ages 9 to 15, he would piss and crap in our bed until we got a lock on the door and he wasn't able to get in anymore. Then he'd just take a dump in the hallway in front of our room. That biological warfare started at around 2.5 years old, and he never grew out of it. I'll try to speed it up as I could literally go on for days about this stuff, but as he grew older, he became more and more unmanageable. He would bite, kick, scream, scratch, and spit at anyone trying to do anything with him. He was kicked out of school twice before he was 9, then let him back in and then kicked him out for good. He had to change schools. The next one put him in a special class that kept him away from the other students. We had to install a door and a lock on the kitchen because he would steal knives and use them to gouge the walls, furniture, and chase people around with them. He was 10. He stabbed me pretty good in the hip and ass. I still have scars. As he grew older, he grew darker. He moved into setting things on fire and torturing local animals. There was a stray dog that hung out around the park near our house. My son blinded it in one eye with a barbecue fork. He would dip cats' tails in gasoline and light them on fire. He became a violent, stinking, vicious beast that lived in our house. We couldn't do anything with him. I will take this opportunity to preempt the tsunami of messages. Yes, we had the kid in therapy. He saw a psychiatrist twice a week and had God knows how many different medications prescribed to him over the years. Nothing worked. Therapy didn't work, meds didn't work, nothing worked. He was like a poison cloud of hate and fury lashing out at anything in his reach. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again. I can't tell you how different our reaction was. Instead of joy, we felt horror. This pregnancy had not been planned, and we really were at a loss over what to do. My son had been such an unending nightmare for 16 years. We couldn't take the idea of starting again from the beginning. We talked a lot about terminating. But A, access to abortion was not easy in those days as it is now, and B, my wife was very against it. We talked about my options. In the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby. And if it turned out evil, we would put it up for adoption. We knew we just couldn't do it again with another child like our son. We had a daughter. She was normal. Suddenly we saw what our lives should have been like the whole time. How things would have been had our son not been himself. She laughed at things. She breastfed without biting. She didn't have any teeth anyway, but you could tell she was just trying to eat, not tear her mum's breast off. After 4 months, she was sleeping through the night. She was happy. She was normal. I can't describe the relief of happiness we both felt. I don't have the words for it. This is where I believe I may have started really pulling back from my son. Up until that time, whatever mistake I made, I had always tried to do my best for my son. I am convinced of that. I tried to help him and love him and care for him. I really tried. But when my daughter was born, my wife and I both instinctively just turned towards her. She became our focus. Not from malice, but just because she was so much easier. She was so happy and sweet. Every moment we were with her was like magic. I understand this was wrong, but we honestly couldn't help it. I don't have a better explanation for that. My son hadn't cared about my wife being pregnant. I honestly don't know if he really understood it. But when we brought our daughter home, he started acting out even more. I didn't think it was possible, but he took it up another notch. At this time he was 17, and we were having blowout screaming matches daily. Usually, after we fought, he would storm out of the house and disappear for hours at a time, or come back the next morning. It was a relief. I started to actually look forward to our fights, because it would get him away from us for a while. After the birth of our daughter, my relationship with my son was almost entirely gone. Our only real interactions were screaming at each other. My wife was even worse with him. She just had nothing left. By that time, if our son ever came into the same room as her, she would just stop whatever she was doing and start screaming, "Get away from me, get away, get out," until he left. He started spending more and more time out of the house, which was a blessing for us. I have no idea what he got up to out in the world, but we were just happy it wasn't being inflicted on us. As a consequence of our son's behavior, we had invested heavily in locks around the house. All of the cheap, thin interior doors in our home had been replaced with thick, dense wood doors that couldn't be kicked through, equipped with keyed locks that my wife and I carried. I know it sounds extreme, but locks and heavy doors were the best way to create safe spaces from him. And again, before I'm inundated with messages, I was not locking my son in rooms like a prisoner. He had free reign of the house and could go as he pleased. My wife and I would lock ourselves in rooms to protect ourselves from him. If anything, we were the prisoners of our own home.
On this day in question, I had fought with my son in the morning and he had left the house in a rage. My wife and I were enjoying some peace and quiet in the kitchen while our daughter napped in our bedroom. And then my daughter began crying. Any parent who has a young child can tell you, you get used to the sound of your child's cries, and you can tell after a while what they need. They cry differently if they are hungry or need changing, or they're just restless and want to be held. Babies can communicate pretty well before they can speak. This cry was none of those things. This cry was terror, pure terror. The second we heard it, my wife and I were both up and out of our chairs and running to the room. The door was locked, of course, and it took a few seconds to get the key right in. When we opened it, we couldn't believe it. My son was in the room. We lived in a bungalow, and the bastard had climbed in the window to get to her. He was standing over her crib with a steak knife in his hand.
Jesus Christ.
I have no idea where he got it. It wasn't one of ours. We controlled our knives very carefully and always kept them in locked drawers. I think he may have stolen it from one of our neighbors' houses. He had broken her skin twice already, once in the belly area and once on her arm. I could see blood running down. When I entered the room, he was dragging the back of the knife down her face, not cutting, almost tickling, teasing her while she screamed. He looked up at us and smiled. Before I even knew what I was doing, I was already moving, running to put myself between them. I didn't think about it, I just moved instinctively. Even with that, my wife got there faster. It was like a movie on fast forward. She got to our son and bashed his hand away and threw her whole body weight against him, knocking him away from the crib and bouncing him off the wall. I picked up my daughter and held her while my wife screened us. I could see her shaking, almost convulsing. I can remember the smell of the room, the sound of my daughter screaming and wailing, the look on my son's face as he stood there. Just nothing. Blank. Dead. There was nothing in his eyes. No emotion. He looked like an alien to me. I watched my wife take a step forward toward him. I could have reached out and stopped her, but I didn't. She stepped forward again, very close to him, and I could have stopped her again, but I didn't. She waited looking at him for maybe 3 to 5 seconds without moving, and then she punched him in the face. Now, until this point, you may have been picturing my wife as a typical woman, small frame, dainty, delicate. This is not the case. My wife does have a small frame, but dainty and delicate, she is not. Never has been since I've known her. Since her early teens, my wife has been a boxer. MMA didn't exist back then, but karate and boxing were big in those days, and my wife was a very talented amateur. She was about 130 pounds, she carried a lot of muscle, and she knew how to punch. I had 70 pounds on her back then, and I have no doubt that in a real fight between me and her, she could have and would have pounded me flat. Neither of us had ever laid a hand on our son in anger before, but something broke in her that day, and all the years of anger, pain, sorrow, and frustration just came pouring out. When she hit him, his head snapped back and blood started pouring out of his nose.
Good.
He hardly reacted. He just looked at her with this shocked expression like he didn't know how to process what had just happened. She waited another second, and then she hit him again. I could have reached out and stopped her. I could have dragged her out of the room, taken her away, calmed her down, but I didn't. I just stood there and watched while she systematically started to pound him to a pulp. Every time he brought his hands to cover one part, she would blast him somewhere else. Body, head, over and over. He started screaming, crying out, yelling for her to stop. It's the most genuine reaction I'd ever seen him have to anything in his whole life. But she wasn't stopping. I watched her ramping up, hitting harder, faster, working him like a heavy bag. He tried to swing at her, and she slipped him easily. She was on autopilot, sinking down into her training. I stood there watching for a minute. Then I turned my back on them and took my daughter out of the room.
So, I mean, obviously, when he was a little baby, he had already established himself a troubled youth, and growing up, same thing. But your kids are your kids, and usually, I'm not saying all the time, but usually you love them unconditionally. I mean, in my mind, was this warranted? That the mom almost killed him? It's hard to say. I mean, given what he was, doing with the baby and knowing that was going to cause irreparable harm and mental damage to her parents, his parents. Yeah, I think he did deserve it. Your child or not, you have to draw that line, and sounds like they were more than patient with them. And that just, pushed him over the edge. So I think it was warranted.
I brought my daughter to the kitchen and gave her a bath in the sink. I found that he had cut her a third time on the sole of her foot. All the cuts were superficial, but I cleaned her up and held her until she calmed. I put polysporin and band-aids on her cuts. In our bedroom, I could hear my son screaming, calling my wife horrible names, telling her he would cut her head off and rape her. After a while, I didn't hear him saying anything anymore. Didn't even hear him crying out. I assumed that he must have been knocked out, but I could still hear her beating him. That went on for a long time. Long enough for my daughter to drift off to sleep in my arms.
Wow.
I just sat at the kitchen table waiting for her to finish. Finally, she came out and sat down across from me. Her hands were swollen and red. Her face and arms were splattered with blood. Her chest was heaving. We just stared at each other without saying anything. After a while, I asked her, "Is he dead?" She looked back at me and answered, "I hope so." I nodded. That was all there was to say about that. I understood how she felt perfectly. I felt the same. I didn't know what to do, so we just sat there waiting silently. Eventually, my wife started crying and went to go take a shower. I just stayed there holding our daughter. After a long while, I heard moaning and sobbing coming from our room. Turned out that my son wasn't dead. I went in to see how bad it was, and it was pretty bad. I've never seen a more merciless beating laid onto anyone, before or since. He was lying on the floor, rolling around with blood leaking out of his face, lying in a pool of vomit. His nose was squashed flat out across his face. Both of his eyes were completely swollen shut and started to blacken already. I could see that a couple of his fingers were bent out at weird angles and he had pissed his pants. I think he must have been missing teeth, but I couldn't see any on the floor, and I couldn't see inside of his mouth. His lips were all puffed up and swollen. From talking to my wife about it later, I know now that she had systematically beaten every part of his body, focusing heavily on his legs.
Good.
She told me she kicked him in the groin repeatedly until her legs got tired and had kept beating his body long after he had passed out. When my wife came out of the shower, I still didn't know what to do about our son. I didn't know whether to call the police or an ambulance, take him to the hospital myself. I honestly had no idea what I was supposed to do. After a while, I realized that I simply didn't care what happened to him anymore, and we decided to just let him live or die on his own. There was an in-law suite in the basement that we had never really used, and my wife, my daughter, and I just moved down there. We simply ceded the top floor of the house to my son and locked everything down, separating our lives entirely. There was plenty of food in the upstairs cabinets, enough for a couple weeks or more. He had a washroom and bedrooms to use. We had a washroom in the basement, a small kitchenette, and a separate entrance, so we just stopped going upstairs. We just decided we were done with him. I figured we'd let his food run out and see what happened. Over the next week, we could hear him moving around upstairs sometimes. I think he just spent most of his time lying in bed recovering. I went to work, watching on high alert in case he attacked me in the driveway, but he never did. My wife stayed home with our daughter. She was never out of our sight. One night, we heard him going ballistic, smashing things and banging. We didn't respond. He never tried to get downstairs or get near us, though. I think he was afraid that if he got near us, my wife might finish the job on him. After 3 weeks down in the basement, we hadn't heard anything from above for a few days, and I ventured upstairs to the main floor of the house. The place was demolished, and there was no sign of my son. He was gone. It took months to repair the damage he had done and get the main floor back to normal again. There was food and feces smeared all over the walls and broken glass on the floor, big holes in the drywall. He had ripped.
What is it with certain people who fuck with feces? That is just so nasty to me. I remember one of my first friends ever. He was half Japanese, half Spanish. His father was from Barcelona and his mom was from Japan. His mom was a very beautiful lady. And he looked more Spanish, but like very light complected from like, the Japanese side of him. And this was like my very, very first friend. And this little fool, he lived on the 6th floor, and we used to live in the townhomes. Community that we lived in was, they had buildings, apartments, and then they had townhomes. And where he lived, his family lived on the 6th floor, was the top floor of the apartments. And this little shit would freaking build little clay men, fill it up with ketchup, or put ketchup packets inside of them, and then throw them off and make it look like they're bleeding. And I think, how fucking off do you have to be to, like, especially at that age? I think we were like 6 or 7, somewhere around there. And then one day he comes over, and I don't know, we were in my room playing video games or something, and he leaves, and then he comes back, and then I need to go use the restroom, and this shit did exactly that. He put shit all over the walls, like fucking smeared it all over. And I used to have a really bad gag reflex when I was, a kid, and like I yelled at him, and my mom comes upstairs and she sees that, and she automatically, kicks him out of the house, because she knew there's no way in hell I would never do something like that. And that young to already be fucking smearing shit all over the walls. He wasn't all there. It sounds like, yeah. The only thing I ever seen him committed to were these prayers that he used to do on a daily basis. I don't know which God they believed in, but they had this big altar that had like a bowl, incense, a bell, like all these different types of thing, and they would just go in and repeat it over and over again. That was the only thing I ever seen him like really commit to and, do religiously, no pun intended. But to mess around with your own shit in somebody's house and smear it all over their walls, I mean, I was pissed at him for weeks. Like, I didn't want to hang out with him. I didn't want to do anything around him. And then, being that young, you know, I finally, like, forgave him, but I never had him come over again after that. And my mom sure as shit wasn't going to let him in. So, yeah, just, I could relate with this to some degree.
Ripped the place apart. He tore up the linoleum in the corner of the kitchen and emptied an entire foam fire extinguisher into the living room. I feel thankful that he didn't burn the house down with us in it. I'm honestly not sure why he didn't. The kid wasn't shy about lighting things on fire. After that, I lived in fear every day that he would come back, that he would ambush us out of the blue and try to kill us. We moved house about 3 years later, and I finally stopped being afraid that he would show up again, as now he had no idea where we were. I finally felt safe from him. All this happened a long time ago. My son was born in the spring of 1971. My daughter was born in 88, and I'm an old man now. I'll be 70 this year, and my wife passed from cancer in 2016. My daughter is 31 now. I moved in with her and her husband after my wife passed. I've got 2 granddaughters, and they are the joy of my life. I see a therapist a couple times a month to talk about all this. I don't know where my son is. The last time I saw him was when he was lying on the floor of our bedroom, bleeding and smashed. I haven't heard from him since he left, more than 30 years now. I don't want to. I carry a lot of guilt from that time and a lot of conflicted emotions. I didn't beat him myself, but I allowed him to be beaten, and I thought he deserved it. I was happy it happened. I didn't try to kill him, but I would have been happy if he had died. I will say that I hope he was able to overcome his demons and go live a normal life somewhere. If he wasn't able to do that, if he stayed the way he was, then I truly do hope someone out there killed him. When I knew him, he was a rabid dog, and whichever way it went, I just hope he still isn't out there hurting anyone else.
That was nuts.
Wow, that was the single most insane thing I have ever read. But of course, there is a bright glaring question in the forefront of all your minds right now, including mine, and this is, was this real? Well, let's find out. What I'm gonna do is put the arguments in favor for each side. What I mean by that is I will explain how it could possibly be genuine, and then show why it could possibly be fabricated, and finally come up with the conclusion. I'm going to start with the reasons why the story could be real, and that is simply a condition called ODD, which stands for Oppositional Defiant Disorder. The definition for it being a disorder in a child marked by defiant and disobedient behavior to authority figures. One of the comments under the post said that if you Google accounts of children with ODD, every read is a trip. And yeah, I read some accounts of children with this disorder, and they are actually crazy. While this could possibly be the case, while researching I did notice that I didn't find a case that lasted nearly as long as it lasted here, and there were other Redditors that commented about other people with ODD turning themselves around. So if this is real, this might not be the case of ODD, and could be a case of something more extreme, such as full-on sociopathy or psychopathy. Now onto the reasons as to why this story may be in fact a hoax. And I'm gonna start with some small things, like the age of the man. He is 69 years old, which is definitely a rare age to be using social media and writing a post like this. Again, this is kind of a nitpick, and it could be true, but you just don't normally see this. I think that the beating portion of the story and onward sounds ever so slightly fabricated too. It was shown with great detail that this person was beat to a pulp, and the police never got wind of this. Also, after he was absolutely obliterated and they moved to the basement, and they only stayed there for 3 weeks before he vanishes without a trace. Forever. I don't know about you, but after hearing just how bad he got beat up, I wouldn't think that he even been close enough in a condition to leave in just 3 weeks. Another reason this may be possibly fabricated is that it's just so well written, maybe even a little too well written. I don't know if this sounds like another absurd piece of criticism, but it's structured extremely well and feels like something that was planned out for a long time. The username simply being crazysonthrowoff doesn't exactly help either. I don't see an old man making a Reddit username like that. It sounds almost like an alt account. Some might say that this even reads like a story on r/nosleep, which is a popular subreddit dedicated to telling creepy stories, so why not post it there? Well, on No Sleep, it is known that practically everything posted is fake. The Redditors here clearly didn't want this story to feel fake, so why would they post it there? Also, the Confession subreddit doesn't have many stories of this length, and the No Sleep subreddit does. So if we posted that story on No Sleep instead, it probably wouldn't have garnered nearly as much traction as it received in the Confession subreddit. And again, like mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be regarded as true on there either like he wants. This is most likely just a very talented writer who has had a passion to write this out for a while. It was posted on Reddit with the intention of raising an eyebrow and turning heads, and I'm willing to bet that the reactions he has gotten so far are the exact reactions he was envisioning. So after going through everything, it seems that we have debunked this mystery. I don't see anything in the future contradicting these claims that were just made right here. The only way this entirely shifts is if he comes out with a ton of proof regarding the situation, but that's highly unlikely. If he does though, believe me, we will be here to update you for sure. Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about The Door. Very recently, we decided to cover a mystery on Reddit, and it really was a long time coming. Reddit has some very intriguing mysteries out there, and that's because obviously, you can post whatever you want. Last time we talked about an insane story, but this one is a little different. It's not a story at all. Rather, a picture with a very short caption. Previous owner of new house blocked this hidden basement room off with a shelf. Door does not lead outside. Attached with that is this image, and naturally, it instantly sparked discussion. This is an ominous image, so the post blew up fairly fast. Obviously, everyone was wondering what the hell was inside that door, and we received a few updates, all in the form of replies. The first of which was to someone simply telling him to open it, prompting him to say, "Likewise, horror movies have taught me that questions posed are always scarier and more interesting than any answer I can get out of it. So that is staying closed. Also, my dogs won't go anywhere near the door, so I am doubly not opening it." So that makes me wonder, why won't the dogs go near it? It's very strange. Perhaps it's his psyche. He made a lot of replies after this, with most of them saying pretty much the same things like, "The mystery is always better than the end result, and I'll open it eventually." Thing is though, he never did open the door. This post was made 4 months ago, and we were yet to see behind the barricaded door. He hasn't made a post in 4 months, and he hasn't even left a single comment in 4 months either. With him being gone for this amount of time, people started to worry. Was the force behind the door evil? Is he dead? Is he missing? The internet got really worried for this guy, so what we are going to do today is attempt to answer 2 questions. What happened to the original poster, and what is behind the door? Let's start with the first question. What happened to the original poster? Well, believe it or not, I don't think he's dead. Honestly, I see the insane reactions as people seriously blowing this way out of proportions. A quick look through his comments and post history would give you 2 very simple answers. While looking through, I noticed a very important comment. Somebody asked him why he bought a house and he didn't look through every room, prompting the poster to respond with, "If I bought it, I'd check it out immediately. I ain't dying over rental." This really explains a lot. The house being a rental perfectly explains why he didn't stress over the room, because if this was a house I owned, I'd have to check it out. Besides this, there is an even larger reveal that is seen when you simply scroll through his post history, and that is the frequency in which he posts. You see, he never was the most active guy in the world. He would have stretches where he posted a solid amount, but there are also stretches where there were no posts or even comments for months. A lot of the replies do show that he is frustrated by the replies pleading him to look into the door, so it seems perfectly fathomable that since it was just a rented place and it didn't matter too much to him, he just left the door shut and went off Reddit, like he clearly has done in the past. So yeah, as far as the original poster goes, he's probably living your average life. It was a rented place and the borderline harassment of the post had him sign off Reddit. which was a thing he did in the past quite a bit. But now, let's move on to the second mystery. What was behind that door? First off, we're gonna start with what we usually do in these sorts of situations, and that is, it was staged. Who knows, maybe this was a set that he just took a picture of and posted it, knowing it would get a reaction. Usually this is the most logical explanation, but this is one of the rare cases where I really believe it to be true. Also, as a side note, reverse image searches yield no results, so this is an original picture and not just something taken offline. I'm not ruling out the scenario that it is actually fake, but I do think there are stronger theories. The first of which coming from a comment on the post stating that if the bank owned the house between the last owner and him, they probably just put stuff the property company was supposed to throw out in it. This is a very simple answer, but definitely makes sense. As far as the whole creepy "my owner barricaded the door" thingy goes, I don't see it being true at all. This shelf looks like it just fell over. If it were to be picked up without moving at all, it would very clearly be standing flat against the wall, so it definitely seems to just simply fallen over. This coincidental shelf placement also leads me to believe that there is just simply nothing in here at all. We know now that the shelf wasn't put there on purpose, so with him renting an apartment, which would presumably be empty, the chance that this room in the basement is also empty is very, very, very high. So yeah, this mystery is easily debunked. The internet most definitely freaked out over this event, but doing the proper research would show you that he doesn't post that often, only rented the place and got annoyed at the comments. The guy is probably just living a normal life now, and the basement room either had old furniture in it, or nothing at all. We won't ever truly know what was in that room, but the chances of it being something sinister or interesting really is very low. And that's it.
So I haven't heard this yet, but I want to throw this out there to subscribers and get your guys' take if you have the time to write back.
Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about the incredibly strange post that was recently found on r/RBI. This is the mystery of u/Ezekiel46J. Now, on this channel, we have dealt with our fair share of Reddit mysteries already, and they have always led to some of our favorite mysteries that we have covered. I think the reason Reddit can lead to topics that end up being so intriguing is simply due to the anonymous nature of the platform. And while it's not like 4chan where you are literally anonymous, it's still very easy to share astonishingly personal things without embarrassment or fear. This sharing of information leads to the platform having such a wide array of people. You can find regular everyday people getting or giving life advice, you can find comedic scenarios, and on the other side of the coin, you can find the tragedies and horror stories. The mystery we will be talking about today is, of course, one of those. Very recently, a post blew up on r/RBI, which, as the name of the subreddit suggests, it's the FBI but done by Reddit. This sub actively solves real-world mysteries daily, and searching for help, a user by the name of Ezekiel46J created the post.
I want to find other people who came from the place that I did.
This post has gone semi-viral already due to the disturbing nature of it, vividly explaining a place that the original poster grew up in, and we're going to read all of it. So without further ado, let's get into this.
I'm not good at remembering things from so long ago, but I'm gonna try. I grew up in rural Alabama. Our place was a bigger house that looked more so like a barn with a bunch of rooms in it. The place was past a forest and near a big cliff, and that's all I remember from the location. I don't think we had an address, but I would have not paid attention enough to see one. We weren't near any other people for probably a couple of miles. Everything was run down and falling apart. There was barely any electricity and only water sometimes, but even that wasn't much. Very low money area, and what I always knew was that there was other places like ours, and I knew of the 2nd, 1st, 11th, 9th, and mine, which was the 6th. They were all down south. I didn't know if there were others in Alabama, but I knew 2 of them that were in Virginia and Louisiana. They had the name that sounded like Lagoon, but not quite. We weren't allowed to leave. They were absolute backwards people. The other places, though, I heard had it even worse, because they had an obsession with angels and the devil. Ours, not as much. There were around 30 adults, and kids a little less. The kids were mean as hell to each other, and all the grown-ups did was screw. I knew words to speak, but I didn't know what they meant in reading, and I couldn't write for shit. We had to use wet paper to scrub our teeth clean. The girls used old towels when they were bleeding, but some just let themselves bleed. I only had 2 shirts and 1 pair of shorts, and nobody ever got their clothes cleaned. I didn't even know my middle or last name or the day I was born. We got food every few days, but I always had something wrong with it. That was just a few things of what it was like for us. I left in 1975 when I was 12. I went with my best friend and another girl who wanted to leave too. And another kid I picked up the messes from was supposed to come, but he disappeared from behind us. I went to Virginia to find the 11th one because I had been there before. What made me do this is because I learned I had a brother who died alone in one of them when he was 12.
Wow.
He was disabled and they hurt him. They took his mother from him because they thought he was born with horns. I want to find others like me so I can know more about where we came from and what it was like for us. Maybe even find the ones I knew if they were still there. The only good lead I got is the one from Virginia was from Sperryville. It was hidden off, but there was a mark in a tree. I don't know what the place looks like now or if it's even there anymore. I'm not good with this stuff, and sorry this is all messy. My wife uses this site before and said it's good at helping. Thanks for anything.
Before jumping into this mystery at all, I just wanted to make some comments on the post in general. Basically, there were 2 things that I found really important about this post. 1, the grammar is consistently awful. In the post, he seems to have a valid explanation for this too, as according to him, he didn't really learn how to read or write here. The other thing of importance I wanted to go over was the one line where he mentions leaving in 75 when he was 12. The 75 there most definitely is referring to 1975, which I wanted to clear up since there was actual confusion as to what the original poster meant here. I also wanted to create basically a list of important info about the place he was in, because after this we are going to go over a surplus of potential leads, so having all of this information organized here is going to make it much easier to figure out what leads are tangible and which leads aren't. So, this takes place in rural Alabama. The house that he stayed in was shrouded in a forest, and was more like a barn than a house. It was very trashy, without stable electricity or even drinking water. The most important detail is that there are over a dozen places like this all owned by the same company, spanning multiple states such as Virginia and Louisiana, with a name that sounded like Lagoon. It's also important to add that they marked trees. Now, that's all the really important information that we can get from the post itself, but the original poster has actually been incredibly active ever since the post was made, and has answered tons of great questions that undoubtedly will help us in the search, because he relays a ton of really important information. The first major piece of importance I found in his comments was that this place, or places, was in fact created by a woman, and while she was the creator, she wasn't necessarily a leader like how it is in most cults. This detail will unquestionably narrow our search down. He also still remembers some of the adult names, which all had religious ties, as you can see here. Here's one of the really dark parts. This place consistently beat him and even drugged him. They also had weapons on them at all times. But one comment that we must show is his very detailed remembrance of what exactly the place was like on the inside.
Most kids didn't have parents with them, and over the years I've been thinking more that they might have been taken. Babies were born there, but sometimes I just see an adult coming up with their hand around the back of the kid's neck. Maybe they were just given up or found. I was actually the odd one out because I had my dad. I think what rules there varied from place to place, but from what I heard about the others, I think ours was the most lax. I can't remember the things about God that they told us, but they had a state of mind like they were being held hostage. I could not tell if they believed what they were saying. They'd just yell all crazed and it felt freaky. It was an obsession. The thing with the religion was that they had lots of emphasis on angels. It was like they switched the roles of sins with angels. There was a woman who would fall apart at random, and she didn't want to be an angel. People would just go ballistic. I can't even begin to guess what it was all about. They were paranoid all the time. They threatened us with shotguns if they found out we went in the forest because there were angels. I feel like there's some symbolism in that. My dad in specifics had it the worst. I think he had this complex relationship with God and was obsessed and afraid, but felt a hatred for him. It's hard to talk about, but he would hurt himself so bad because he was afraid of what God would take from him if he didn't. Sometimes he called himself the devil. I lost him to this, and after I left, I wondered if I was the devil because it all started with him after I was born. Everybody had something wrong. I was so normal to it that when I started seeing emotions of regular people, I didn't get them. When the women didn't dress provocatively, somebody would always have something to say. The men were violent. They didn't want much from us, but when they did, you had to do it, or you would be beat to a pulp. Sex was all the time, everybody and kids. Even I started too early. My mom had me at middle school age. Everything felt the opposite. It didn't feel like God.
Wow. Okay, so let me ask you guys an opinion because I already have one established here. When I first met my ex, I had shamefully said that I thought it was just a one night stand. I really didn't think it was gonna turn into anything more. In fact, the woman that I did have a big crush on, she gave me a ride back to my house that night and like was quizzing me up and down on like what I was gonna do, I don't know. It felt like maybe, all these years I've had a crush on her that I finally am gonna get my opportunity, and I fuck it up for this woman that I didn't even really want to marry, but stupidly did, and had a child with her, which I would never take back. My daughter, obviously, but just always wish it was with somebody else. But that's not the point. When I first met her, she didn't have her ears pierced, but she dressed real nice, and you could tell that she had like expensive taste in the type of clothing and handbags that she had. And so I just was like, wow, she must have a really good job. And she did. She was an accountant, or she still could be, for the Department of the Interior, with the Bureau of Land Management. I know she's like a step 13, and at a step 14, that's when you become like elected, either through vote or through secretary. And I don't know if she's ever going to pursue that, but they make six figures a year. I didn't find this out till much later in our relationship, but her not having her ears pierced, I never noticed at first until her and I, in our relationship, started to get further in, and she would be around like my family, some of my friends, and mind you, my best friend was mutual friends with her, and she would always compliment them, like, on their jewelry or their earrings. And so one day she asked me, like, hey, can we go get my ears pierced? And I'm like thinking, I mean, you're almost as old as me. Why are you asking, like, if we can? Of course, if you want to go do it, let's go, And so we go get her ears pierced, and she loved them. She bought these diamond earrings from Tiffany's and, had them placed there. And then we get back home, and then she has just this world of guilt. And I'm like, you're feeling guilty because you got your ears pierced? And so, again, I didn't think anything of it other than, maybe she was in pain or something. I don't know. Like, it just, I was like, this is weird, but okay, I'll leave it at that. Well, about a year into our relationship, I noticed, her mother didn't want to meet me. And I'm thinking, that's pretty fucked up. I mean, you're already living with me, which happened very quick, and I later found out why. And your mother doesn't want to meet me after all this time. So finally got to the point where her mom decided to meet me, and to my face, her mother, like, just, loved me. But I didn't know everything that had gone on prior to this and what her reasonings were. So they have this very weird religion where they all group together at someone's home. Now, mind you, all the men in this so called group, this religion, whatever, they're very successful. I mean, her brother, for instance, which was the only person she never talked shit about. Other than that, nobody else escaped her wrath. I mean, she talked shit about me. She talked shit about our dog that she supposedly loves so much. She threw a shit fit at our first ultrasound that it was so fucking embarrassing because I just had made the comment, most of the guys on my side of the family usually have boys, but I'll be happy either way because I have 3 nieces, and if we have a little girl, that'd be awesome. And when the lady asked if we wanted to know the sex and she agreed, like, she just totally fucked up the whole ultrasound experience. And so all these things are starting to click. Like, how was her upbringing? And so I start kind of like wording things a little bit differently with her mother. And then as they invite me over, I learn, okay, they don't celebrate Christmas, but they really love Thanksgiving. And then I got to see and hear how they worshiped God. Everything was spoken like the King James version of the Bible. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's like thee, thou, shout, like shalt, shout, honor thy Lord, giveth and taketh, those types of words. And before they would pray, they would sing a hymn. All the women knew how to play the piano. I'm not shitting you. And most of the women were housewives, but the ones that weren't were just like the men, extremely successful. They didn't own a TV, so all they got to do was read or play outside. My ex was the lead of her high school class, valedictorian, and she graduated summa cum laude from college. And here she got this amazing job making 6 figures a year by the time she was like 22. Mind you, I didn't meet her till I was well out of the music industry. She still had this job. This is right after my grandma and my dad died that she comes into my life. So when I'm at Thanksgiving with them and all that, I'm hearing this for the first time. And then I start noticing that her sister-in-law is just like her mom. They both wear very long skirts, like down to their ankles. They have their hair up in a bun, and they're very well covered. Now, most people will say, oh, that's this, like I could think Pentecostal, Seventh-day Adventist, Mormon, what is it? Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. I think that's also Mormon. Jehovah's Witness. None of that. They were none of those. None of those applied to them. Because I know there are some groups that dress like that, but they were not a part of those groups. And so when we went through our divorce, a buddy of mine who kind of went through the same thing, he said, it will look really good for your custody if you go to a parenting class, and so I'm like, okay. So I enroll in this parenting class, and the lady who teaches it, she happened to be a former seminary student, and she's in her late 40s, mid 50s, somewhere around there. And so I start to tell her about, how odd this religion that she's in. And then she's like, I really caught her attention. She's like, well, tell me about it. So I don't know how they knew, but they would randomly meet at somebody's home. And when you walked in there, you could literally hear a mouse fart. I mean, it was just so uncomfortably silent. And see, with me, in the churches that I've been a part of and the private school that I went to, where we had mandatory Bible classes in order to graduate, and we had chapel service every Wednesday. We're used to greeting one another, giving one another a hug, asking how their family's doing, asking, they need prayers for this or that. It's just bonding. Here, there was none of that. And so I'm walking there, and she, being my ex, had removed herself from that lifestyle when she met me. So there was some resentment towards me from her mom for that, and also resentment for the fact that she had her ears pierced, which was to her a sin, because anything you do to modify your body is a sin to the Lord. And so that's why they don't cut their hair and keep it in a keep it in a bun. They don't wear makeup. They don't have piercings. They only wear one ring, and that's their wedding ring. And it gets even crazier from here. So here's the crazier part. So they have what they call leaders. Now, I wish to this day I would have asked who it was, but just hearing it really threw me off, and it made me more upset than anything else. And I knew there was nothing I could do about it at this point. But my ex, whether or not it's true, she came up with the story saying that she was raped when she was younger. And it's like, I don't want to hear about that. I want to resolve it. But of course, there's nothing I could do to resolve it. I just didn't push the issue any further because I didn't want it to affect her negatively, and then her start having a fucked up night, which then translates into us arguing. And so I would just, hug her and say, like, I'm so sorry that this happened, whatever. And it usually seemed to calm the situation. But then she starts telling me, and she didn't say it was one of these people, but I'm kind of putting two and two together here. So they have these people who lead the groups, and they're called the leaders. I don't know if there are women involved, but I know, there's men. And what they do is they could randomly show up at one of their parishioners' homes, and they will actually be put up for 2 weeks with, some of the parishioners will give their own master bedroom to the leader that's at their home. The leader would be fed, he would be leading, nightly, I guess, services. And their gatherings weren't very long. It usually was like over in a half an hour. What they would just do was like one big confessional. The way I imagine a confessional would go. I'm not Catholic, so I never had to confess my sins to anybody. But they like all went around, the room, and each of them were like, oh, I feel the Lord can make me, a better person if I'm just more tolerant of, Hispanics because of a story. That part I'm just embellishing, but there's something that her uncle said that just really could have ended and fucked up a really nice trip that we were having. But that was their gatherings. That was their get-togethers. And so this leader would stay at their houses, and I'm sure it happened several occasions with my ex. They stayed at their home, and were given full access to everything in the home. Could do as they please, fed meals, led nightly prayer groups, or whatever they called it, meeting. That's what it was called, meeting. And then go back to bed. And after the 2 weeks was up, when they would leave, the permissioner would give the leader money, an undisclosed amount. And I asked my ex once, I'm like, well, how much money does this group have that you're associated with? She's like, I'm not associated with it anymore. She's like, I got out of that a long time ago. But I'm like, but why do you go back, and why have you drugged me with you over there when you clearly know that that's not something that I'm comfortable with? That's not my religion. She's like, well, I just do it for my mom's sake, and that's probably the only reason why. I know it's a little different and weird, but I just want her to see that you're trying, or some bullshit along that line. And I said, but tell me, how much money do these leaders are in control of? She's like, I know it's over $25 million. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, she's like, but it's not just based in Colorado. She's like, every year they get together and they have this big gathering from around the United States, like right kind of near, I want to say like between Colorado Springs and Castle Rock. It might be in the community of Elizabeth, Colorado. There's a lot of wealthy people who live out in that area, but it was just an open field. The women would be like, it was funny because all the women cooked and they all baked very well. That's what they did. The men, on the other hand, didn't. The men were all, like I said, successful. Her brother was, or is, like vice president. I'm not going to mention which railroad, but he oversees the track safety. And if a train derailment happens, it goes through him. And he's the first one, to start delegating, supervisors and managers, since he is the president of that division, to start researching what happened, all that stuff. Another guy there was in the CIA. Another one FBI. Another one was like a regional manager of a large credit union. I mean, all the guys were extremely successful, and it was because none of them were ever raised with the TV or were allowed to watch movies, or they had a set schedule of reading different books. They weren't homeschooled, but it was just weird. It sounded like they had like almost like the Illuminati or something, like they had control on their own destiny. And so when we got a divorce, it worries me every single fucking night that when we divorced, she remarried rather quickly, which I did not give a shit about. It was funny too, because when we were at the court for the custody, like, they really think I give a damn when they're like, oh, so you got remarried and you're happy and you're pregnant again. And I'm like, why is that even a point? I don't give a shit. I'm here for my daughter, and I don't care if she's knocked up again. And it was only her second child, our child. My daughter was our first. But yeah, about 6 months after we divorced, she was remarried and pregnant, and that was fine. I just wanted my daughter and my dog back. That was it. But she went back to that look of that. It's a cult, and that lady that I was seeing for the parenting class, the former seminary student, she's like, you need to find out the name. I was like, I have tried over and over again asking, what is the name of this, so-called group or this religion or whatever, and my ex like would say it doesn't have a name. I'm like, it has to be referred to as something. I'm like, do you even know, or who knows, or what? And she wouldn't tell me. I don't know if it's because she genuinely didn't know, or if she just didn't want to tell me because I might open my mouth and say something to her mom or to, her brother or something along those lines. And she's like, for the sake of your child, she's like, find out. And I've been trying to ever since. I mean, it scares me to death because if she was raped, what if it was from one of those leaders being at their house, and once they leave, like, oh, thank you for coming and eating our food and having us dress you up, and giving up our beds to you, but here's $10,000, and be safe at the next permissioner's home, because it was no small amount that they were giving these leaders. And the reason why I found out a lot of why her mom was hesitant to meet me was because she blamed me for her getting her ears pierced. I'm like, that was up to her. That was her decision. Just like it was her decision one day to buy me 3 pairs of $300 jeans at Nordstrom's. And when I looked at the, I'm like, oh, these are really nice, and they feel like silk, but they're actually like denim or whatever. She's like, here, I'll get you some. I'm like, okay, sure. But it wasn't until I got home that I looked at the price tag, and I'm like, fucking 300 and some dollars a pair. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, why didn't you tell me? And she bought like 3 bottles of that Chanel Blue, which I actually really liked, but I can't wear it anymore because it reminds me of her. Um, but yeah, I mean, they were great with money. But see, I didn't know that my ex was coming from a previous marriage, and she was having an affair on her husband with me. And that tore me apart. After the divorce, I got a hold of him to start digging up dirt on her. That would make the custody battle a little bit more favorable for me, because they were certainly favoring her, especially in Jefferson County, Colorado. That's very prejudiced against minorities. And they just proved it in the court system the whole time that we were going through this. But their group, their meetings were not very multiracial. It was mainly made up of Caucasian people that are there to confess their sins and be forgiven. However, there was a night there, and I've mentioned this before, there's sometimes when I'll just get really, really stressed, and I'll just say, fuck it, and I'll have a cigarette. But I wouldn't ever be disrespectful and smoke around her family or in front of them or whatever. I would around my own family, because, my family has people who smoke cigarettes. That's the only thing I do. I don't drink, I don't do drugs or anything. So I would always use hospital gloves, because I was working at the VA at this time. And surprisingly, those, if you wear one of those and you're smoking cigarettes, they don't leave any smell on your hand whatsoever. And always eat a ton of Altoids. Well, we go out to Oregon because we're going to go, fishing for some tuna from Lincoln, Oregon. And we catch a shitload of tuna, like a lot. And like, you're spent after you catch like 2 of them. So I'm just like sitting on this, on the side of the garage, and it's nighttime, like maybe 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I could hear my ex-uncle and my mother-in-law, they came outside, and they're chit-chatting about the day, this and that. And he asks her, like, oh, how do you feel about your ex marrying, or, how do you feel about, your daughter marrying a wetback? And I so badly wanted to start laughing just because, the racial shit doesn't bother me. I went to an all white school. I grew pretty tough skin a long time ago. And whenever it was told to me, it was always told to me out of, just out of fun. Like, hey, what's up, big beater? Or big Mexican? Or what's up, big wetback? Things like that, that I knew were out of fun. I know that might be offensive to some people, and I'm sorry if I offend you, but uh, when it's said in malice, like the way he said it, like I could have easily told my ex, and she would have like gone ballistic on him and probably had us leave that night. But I just kept my mouth shut. But it still perplexes me that I don't know the name of this group. If anybody out there decides to make a comment, likes this video, whatever, if you ever heard of anything like this, let me know the name. I know, my subscriber list is small at 333, and I'm going to continue to try to grow this channel. But if you ever run across this video after I post it tonight, in the late future, let's say a year from now, 2 years from now, send me a name that you think this group might sound like, because it really is for the safety of my daughter that I'm worried about. But anyways, that was a cult. I believe it wholeheartedly. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and stop it right here. It's already at 42 minutes, so it's pretty long. Hope you guys found this interesting, and I may come back with one more video, so let's see how this goes. But until that time, thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I appreciate you stopping by, so peace.